Hey there, it's Margie Bryce, your host of the Crabby Pastor podcast, where we talk about all things sustainability, whether it's sustainability in ministry, in your personal life, and we acknowledge that the church is in a transitional time, so we hit topics there too that are going to stretch your mind and the way you lead, especially how you lead yourself so that you don't become the crabby pastor. Hey there, it is Margie Bryce with the Crabby Pastor podcast, and we talk about all things self-care here in an effort to be good stewards with the body that God has given to us so that we may serve God's purposes wholeheartedly and be able to present to God our best. So I see self-care as well beyond just food and exercise, because you can scroll through all the podcasts and just see how often I talk about food and exercise, even though I attempt to work on that area of my life, always. But I see self-care as a bigger picture. And I am here today, or Janyne is here with us today, I guess is a better way to say that. And we're going to talk about the way we talk to ourselves, or self-talk. I know I can be very guilty of that. And at times I've realized that I've done it. And then I think that it's no big deal. And I move on to something else. It's not a big deal at all. And I'm coming to a deeper understanding that it does make a difference. It absolutely does make a difference. So I'm here with Janyne McConnaughey, who has done a lot of trauma-related stuff. That's a theological word, Janyne, just so you know. Stuff is, they taught me that in seminary. It's the one thing I retain. No, hopefully I retain.
They taught me in academics.
I know. Yeah. I know. So Janyne, introduce us again. I know you've been on the podcast before, but go ahead and introduce yourself, and feel free to share with us the most recent things you're working on.
So first of all, thank you for having me. Again, when the note came through, I was like, oh, I love conversations with Margie. So I'm happy to be here today. And I really have taken a couple months to do some further healing and kind of step back from a lot of things. And this is actually my first podcast back into the game. And so we'll see how this goes today. So, but I have my latest endeavor is that I have a Substack that I'm doing, and it's a mixture of the work I do with survivors, the work I do with religious trauma, the work I do with trauma-based spiritual practices. And so and just the writing that I do. I wrote a book, like Hotel Candelabra, and it's just a kind of an allegory. And so sometimes it's just my writing. So anyway, so I am basically getting back into the game right now, but my Substack is my favorite thing that I'm doing as far as my work right now.
Yes, I just read your entry. I think it was today. It's interesting stuff, because it just, again, with the stuff, I apologize. But it was just really interesting reading, and it really kind of makes you think. And that to me, even when I was in ministry, when somebody said to me, wow, Pastor, you really made me think, I felt like I'd hit a home run. That was it for me. I'm not sure what that says about me, but I'm sure something. But anyway, I feel like that's a good thing, because there needs to be more thinking today. The thinking department sometimes seems to be underused in some cases.
Well, that's interesting, because my students, I taught at the college level for 33 years, and my students would walk out of class and say, your classes make my brain hurt. I go, oh, good. That means that you're thinking. And so I generally take a different perspective than is expected. And so, yeah, So thank you for reading. And yeah, today's was interesting. So it's a whole, we're doing a whole, my husband and I together are doing a series on We Do therapy. And when two trauma kids married each other and all the lessons that we've learned, we celebrated our 45th anniversary last week.
Yay.
And so yeah, so that's one of the threads that'll pick up again in September. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we want to talk about why self-talk is so important. You want to start us off, and I'm sure we'll get rolling.
That question is so big.
I know.
Yeah.
Did you ever know I used to be a newspaper reporter?
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's how I can ask respectable questions.
Well, it's a respectable question. So why is self-talk so important? And I think that everything that we do is affected by what we believe about ourselves. And of course, in my work that I do with trauma, a traumatic event can happen, but trauma is actually the impact of what happens to us as a result of that traumatic event and our ability to find support and process it and get it out of our body and all those kinds of things. So when we talk about self-talk, then we are going to be limited in everything we do by what we believe about ourselves. And self-talk is basically what we believe about ourselves coming out as something verbal in our head. And I thought about metacognition. Okay, this is the educator. I'm going to show up with metacognition. Okay, I love that word. I may say it again a couple times.
Okay.
Anyway, what it is thinking about your thinking.
Oh
So
my
it's
gosh, I have a headache.
your own thoughts and your own cognitive processes. And that is what you're supposed to do. And so self-talk is a form of that. It's a form of thinking about your thinking. But if it's negative about yourself, then you're not really reflecting on it. You're just
So let me just see how if I'm getting this, making sure that I'm understanding. So if I say, "Boy, I really stink at that," okay, and then you say to yourself, "Wow, why did I say that about myself?" That's thinking about your thinking.
yes,
Sometimes some people don't make it that far though, to the
correct,
why am I saying that about myself?
right. And so metacognition allows you to think about what you just said because we always, I don't know that there's a human being alive that like you're in the middle of some, I started going to the senior center and doing yoga, and if there's any place that negative self-talk is going to show up for me, it's in yoga because I haven't gone for a while and I'm like, why can't I do this? Right. So, by the way, it's really, really healthy for me. It's the best self-care that I can possibly physically do. And so, but then I need to stop and think, well, why do I feel that way about myself? I said, because I'm so concerned about what other people are thinking. And I look around the room and everybody else is just focused on doing the pose, right? They're not looking at me. They can't look at me and do what they're doing, right? And so it takes that extra step, that metacognition, to realize why I'm saying those things about myself during yoga, right? And you're right. If you don't go there, then you begin to believe what you said.
Mhm.
And you begin to be more and more negative about yourself, and then it inhibits what you're able to do. And especially if we're talking about ministry, if you're constantly telling yourself you're terrible at it, then you're gonna be terrible at it, right?
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? I mean, because would we think it's egotistical to say, I am an amazing pastor, nobody is better than me? I mean, now we're wandering into egotistical a bit, but
Yep.
I think it does impact your performance. I know for me, when I first got up to preach, I would just about break out in hives. My neck would get all red and whatever. And the more I did it and the more I stepped into it, I started doing better. But at one point, what I said to myself is put your head up, your shoulders back, and step into that thing that God has called you to do. I started saying that to myself as I walked up to the podium, up to the microphone, and then it made a difference. It really
Yes.
did.
Yes, because if you're sitting there waiting your turn and you're thinking, oh, am I going to say something stupid when I get up there? Inevitably, you will say something stupid when you get up there.
Well, that's not a comfort,
Right?
is it? That's not.
I mean, you just are like, no, you have to stop yourself to go, why do I think that? I think that because of, and you can go back and you usually your subconscious will take you to the exact incident that you just died in with shame because of it. And you get stuck there and think it's going to happen again and again. But yeah. And sometimes I mean, and then like what is your definition of doing something stupid? What every other human does? You know, that you mess up your words or you say stuff. Right? Like, why did I in that podcast? Why did I keep saying stuff? Oh, because
No.
that's what.
Oh, thanks. Now I'll be thinking about that the rest of the podcast. Sometimes
No, you were already thinking about it.
no,
Yeah.
I was done thinking about it. Well, really though, feeling like you're a failure and saying that to yourself, feeling like you are worthless or I'm a bad pastor. I mean, I've said that in jest. I'm not serving actively in ministry right now, but when I did at certain points, I'd say, man, I'm a bad pastor. Like they send you to the bad pastor, the sin bin, like in hockey or something. Time out for you. But it does change your
Hmm.
moment in a really interesting way. Do you think?
I think so. And when we say I am a human being who's doing the very best job that I can at being a pastor right now, and I am not perfect, and it is okay not to be perfect, then it allows you the space to be a human being. I think that sometimes we just beat ourselves up for being human, right? Um,
And
I,
not perfect.
and not perfect, and no one is, and no one really expects anyone else to be either. I mean, if we're really honest, we rather like it when other people are human because then we feel less pressure on ourselves to be to meet some standard that can never be met. And so but I think that it does affect us. It affected when you would walk up having those thoughts in your head and instead of thinking, you know what? I know what's important to say today, and I may not say it perfectly, but that's okay because I I don't have to be perfect, and it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then tying that back into our identity in Christ and what we are called to do and to be about and stepping in. I mean, I'm pretty sure that God knows we're not perfect. What do you think? I mean, but at the same time, the stuff, there I am again, the stuff we say to ourselves about ourselves are things that typically we would not say to other people.
Oh, we would not say those things to other people. I mean,
Not your best friend, even.
right. And I'm looking across the way my best friend lives. One of my best friends lives right next door to me, and so I'm looking over at it into their yard and I'm like, I would stop her, right? It was saying that I would say, wait. What are we saying? What are we saying here? And because it hinders relationships, it hinders everything. But the thing is that you can't stop yourself. I think that's an important point to make is that that's another part of being human, is that when we do something, immediately shame starts to attack us and say, well, you did that. There's just something horribly wrong with you. And there's something, you're never going to you're worthless. You're never going to, you're always going to make these mistakes, blah, 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 and then shame sets in. And the thing to do is to be like, oh, I recognize you, shame. I recognize you. I see you trying to take control of my life and make me believe things about myself that is not true. And then you can step back from it and say, no, what I believe about myself is, again, I'm an imperfect human who's doing the very best job that I can, especially in ministry. And I think you have to say that a lot, because you're never going to get it exactly right.
And sometimes the sheep will tell you.
Right.
Because the sheep bite sometimes, right?
Yeah. Like, as an author, I get so little pushback. I mean, I've just been so blessed by that. I have amazing supporters and people who follow along with my writing and things, but I have to know that I won't always get it right. And somebody will ask me a question, and sometimes it creates, and I'm like, oh, wow, I wonder why I said that in there. And I realize that there's something that I need to go process and think about more. And then I'll usually come back and write something about that. Right. So it's actually, it's a learning experience. If we can be curious about why we're saying the negative things toward ourselves that we do, then we can be curious about, where did that begin? Where did that particular feeling about myself begin? And it's curiosity that turns it into a learning experience instead of a negative experience.
Well, that's pretty powerful stuff. If you can stop yourself and do thinking about your thinking thing, and then if you start to see a pattern of this, I think I'm starting to be on the lookout for it. Just saying, oh, I'm useless, or why do I think I'm great? I guess imposter syndrome fits in here somehow as well. If you get to the place where you just are questioning the legitimacy of your call, of your ability to serve. I think one of the podcasts that I get a lot of hits on is one called Am I Enough? That one seems to be pretty popular. That seems to be a question that, and no, none of us are enough for this task. And that's why we have to be reliant on God's power in our heart and in our lives, and as we serve. But for some reason, that still doesn't turn off the spigot of,
I think that I'm going to push back a little right there, because I think that when God creates us, we are enough, right? God doesn't create us and say, oh, I'm creating you is not enough.
You're probably not.
You're not enough. You never were. You never will be. Right.
Well,
so I think that on one hand, I know that because we are human, that we do need to depend on God walking with us and giving us wisdom and helping us to do the right thing. But that needs to be separated over here from who we were created to be, which I believe that, and you can push back to me too, but I believe that we are created with the gifts and the talents and everything that we need to walk in partnership with God and do the important work that God is calling us to do. And so, and I think that that has been really important to me, especially because I spent so long not doing what God gifted me to do. So I did not publish my first book until I was 65. Even though when I was working on my doctorate, they said you're the best natural writer in the cohort. even though when I did, I mean, self-studies at colleges are like not interesting writing, right? And they said, the self-study team said, this is the most enjoyable self-study we've ever read. Then I mean, and this was just repeated to me over and over again, and yet I didn't get it. Because I didn't believe I could really be an author. And it took me months of therapy and my therapist trying to get me to understand that yes, this is your gift. So where did that begin? Right? Because I was born with that ability. Yes, I honed it. Yes, worked on it. Yes, I spent my whole life writing for other projects, etc. But I was born to be a writer, and I had everything I needed to do that, but I didn't believe in myself. And
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
So
So,
there was negative self-talk in that. What do I think
oh,
I'm doing? Why do I think I can do that? Or
right. Clear up until the time I won 2 awards on Trauma in the Pews. I was still doing that negative. Well, people are bited. Yeah, maybe I say some important things. And so the 2 awards that the book won, this is really funny. The 2 awards are very different from each other. One of them is more of a pure writer, and the other one is how the book is constructed and so it really is the publisher side of it. And so I mean, I have to put the content in there. The publisher has to work with the content, but it's more of a combination. But by the time I'd won 2 awards, I was like, okay, I give up, God. Yes, you created an author. All right, I'm good.
so then you were able to give that kind of self-talk to yourself.
Right.
I am
Right.
a fill in the blank. And I know recently I went to some coaching development work out at a university, and it was amazing stuff in that we were learning to identify when people say, I am fill in the blank about themselves. And then as coaches, that is an important thing to listen for and then to follow up on. Or really say more about that, or why do you say that about yourself? All of those kinds of things. So that's kind of not a point of Genesis, but it was a really re-emphasis of that self-talk piece.
Right. Well, okay, so let's talk about a lot of the messages that we give out, get in the church, the idea, which theologically I completely disagree with that we're worthless, that we are, the whole exegesis of being wicked. I mean, that you need to go do a whole study on that one and so forth. But there's a prevailing in some theological camps, there's a prevailing feeling that you are and I it so part of that is theological. So I did my dissertation on the view of the child from innocence to non-innocence. And I studied all of the theological trains that, all the way from Plato, Aristotle, through all the major theologians, through all the denominations, and what their view of the child was. And it ranged from innocent to born sinful, completely sinful and wicked. And you can trace those all the way down, and how the teaching methodologies and things are chosen as a result of that. So I think we have to understand that theologically, you have to really dissect how that is affecting you and how that is playing into what you say about yourself, like the fear of pride, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we that came up actually a little bit earlier, and I was going to say something, not to be prideful. Well, there's a difference between owning what you're good at and being prideful about what you're good
Mm-hmm.
at.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if I'm prideful about being an author, then I'm going to go say, I'm a better author than anyone else. I'm going to say things like that. If I just own being an author, I'm saying I was born to be an author. I'm gifted as a writer, and I can just own that. And that isn't pride. That's owning the gift that I was given.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's different self-talk there.
And that is definitely different self-talk. And I think scripture says we should not have a view that is too high of ourselves, but we also should not have a view that is too low. That is the Margie Bright
Mhm.
probably poor rendition of what Paul says, not to think too highly or too lowly. But and that's true. Not thinking too lowly either ties in with what we're talking about in terms of how we speak to ourselves. I don't know, maybe you should go look in the mirror and have to really face yourself when you're saying some of these things. I don't know if that would make it better, worse, or make you think about what you're thinking about and saying about to yourself a little more.
It's interesting because I'm speaking at a conference this Saturday, one of the small church conferences, and I did and anyone listening to this podcast, if you want a copy of this, I'll just email me and I'll give it to you. But I took the piece out of Trauma in the Pews, which is a trauma-informed spiritual practice. And I talk about self-affirmations. And one of the things that I say is to walk up and stand in front of the mirror and
Mm.
say things to yourself in the mirror. And that is the absolutely like positive statements to yourself in the mirror is one of the most difficult things that for someone with a low image of themselves for them to do. And it's and that you're right, the balance is not to be looking in the mirror and going, you are just the best. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's a totally different thing, but just to look in the mirror and say, I am loved by God. I was created with gifts and talents for me to serve and make this world a better place. And I can work on those. And let me tell you, when I say that I'm an author and that I'm a gifted author, I know I can give you the list of 10 things that I cannot do. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That I do well, right? And the things that my editors catch me on every single time, right? So it's not that I'm a perfect author. I need editors and Grammarly,
Yeah,
nothing
yeah,
goes
yeah.
out without going through Grammarly. And so there's just this balance that we have to find. Right there in the sweet spot in the middle where we accept both the things that we're created and gifted and the things that, well, yeah, oh yeah, I'm going to do that in everything. Oh my gosh, I did it again. And so, but I'm to the point where I just laugh at it. Like, how many times will it take before? And I do get better, but if I start beating myself up about it, it doesn't do any good. Yeah.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It is strangely like you're being prophetic about yourself when you
Uh-huh.
live in that negative space. And it says things in scripture like, as a person thinks, so they are.
Right.
I mean,
So I actually looked that up. That
did
is so
you?
interesting that you said that because right before I was sitting here and I'm like, oh, I'm going to look that up. And what's so interesting about that is that verse is about who we show to others and who we actually are. Like,
Mhm.
like if you look at the whole context around that, it's about someone who invites you to their party and then they say all sorts of good things about you, but they're in their heart, they're thinking something totally different. And that you should be cautious about just accepting all the nice things that they say because they may not. So I have never ever looked at the entire context around that verse. And so what I realized is that we ourselves need to be the flip side of that is that we need to be honest about who we are. And being honest doesn't, for some reason, we think being honest about ourselves means we have to be negative about ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, that that sounds right. Yeah, if I'm honest with myself, I'm going to say this, and this, and how I missed the mark, whatever the
Right?
mark is. You do that kind of thing. But I love that when scripture bears out our psychology. But think about this, everybody that, pushes back on psychology, and I got called on it once for, I preached a sermon, and it was using a sermon form that I had actually been taught at NTS by Dr. Dan Boone. You give the sociology of a situation, and you give the psychology of a situation, and then you bring in the theology. It's kind of an interesting approach, and it worked in this particular case. But these two gentlemen came up to me afterwards and were grousing at me about that I used psychology in my sermon. And I'm like, well, since when is why we do the things we do somehow out of God's purview, or out of theological discussion? And then you run into verses like, as a person thinks, so they are, and even how the context works and everything. And I love it when scripture not validates psychology, but it certainly shows that God's aware of why we do the things we do and how we work. I mean, if God is the author and constructor of us, I think that that's probably something that that's important.
Over the past couple years, polyvagal theory has become more prominent.
What is that?
Okay.
Just going for the biggest word used on the podcast.
I have done metacognition and polyvagal theory all in the same podcast. Okay.
I can't keep up. See, there's my negative self-talk. I can't keep up.
And so that's kind of what I do is I go and I study all this, and then I kind of distill it. So I can distill polyvagal. And actually I have another freebie that I gave away at a conference if anyone's interested in that one too. I did it during the pandemic about just breathe. And okay, so when you are having a really stressful day and all of a sudden you sigh, okay, like I'm the best sigher in the whole world. And what I came to realize is that we have a nerve that it's called the wandering nerve, and it runs all throughout our body. It connects our brain to every part of our body. And it has two parts. I'm really simplifying, like all my friends. They're like, you made that a little too simple, Janyne. Okay, so it has two different parts, and you stay in balance by those parts, either slowing down, being at rest. All of that is controlled by this nerve in your body. So what I began to understand is that kind of breath is how your body is trying to bring that nerve back into balance. Okay. So you think about it, and after you sigh really big like that, then you feel like you can keep moving and do whatever. I had a place where I would walk through the building, and I actually have one of my Substacks just on this, which does a much better job than I'm doing right now. But when I would get ready to walk into the admin offices, I would sigh by the secretary there every time. And one day she stopped me. She said, "Do you know you sigh every time you walk by me?" And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know why I do that, but now I do, because I was trying to calm my nervous system. It's the autonomic nervous system that is just how God created us. That is how God created us. And we have so many ways that we can, and actually the project I'm working on, which is Trauma in the Pews 2.0, is talking about how we can use the pause and how we can understand how our bodies work so that we calm ourselves instead of going into the negativity. And so anyway, I don't know how I got on that, but
you just wanted to say polyvagal what?
Polyvagal theory. I know. So the researcher who introduced this to the world, I got to introduce him to a seminar one day on the line, and before, we were in the green room together and we talked about grandchildren, and and I was just like, I was just like, everything that I want to learn about this, and it's so deep that I can't. But then he was just a human being, and he calmed me, right? Just his very presence. And I mean, I was supposed to be the person that was introducing him, and he was calling me because I was in the room with him. And I just think I think about how our lack of understanding about our bodies and the ways that our body reacts to the world around us, reacts to what is, whether we feel safe emotionally or physically. Children in the classroom who do not feel safe cannot learn. We cannot interact well with other people unless we are able to help our body feel safe. And so the internal self-talk that we're talking about is many times a result of that, of our bodies being out of whack and not being able to find the pause and to calm ourselves. And we can't live. I posted on Facebook. I don't know if you saw it. I posted, this is how we want life to be. And there's this straight road that's just going straight off into the distance, and it's just flat and smooth, right? And this is how life really is. And it was a roller coaster.
Yeah, yeah. I know I've seen
Right?
that. And I think when you are under stress, when you neglect to slow down,
Uh-huh.
I think that is when it's when my brain seems to fire a lot more negativity.
Yes.
I don't
And
know.
that's because you feel unsafe in your own body. As soon as you emotionally or physically or in the situation feel it, you go toward the negative, which is kind of built into us as a protective measure.
When
So
a lion might eat us and we feel,
right,
when
right.
that.
Like I don't feel safe right here because there's lions around, and the same reactions occur in our body even though we don't have lions roaming across our neighborhoods right now.
I mean,
We
I'm thinking about pastors, and I was contemplating this and how I'm going to roll this out, but allowing pastors to have conversation about leading people in this election cycle,
Mhm.
and because a lot of people don't feel safe right
You
now.
don't feel safe.
Regardless, I'm not going to wax and wane political here at all, but I'm saying people, are hearing this and that and this and that, and sometimes you don't know what to think, and then you just don't feel safe. And then as a leader in a faith community, how do you address that, and how do you lead in the midst of that? And I'd like to be able to have conversation with ministry leaders about that, because it's very easy to go negative especially when there's a lot of negative around.
Right, right. And I so some days I'll be on Facebook. I do research on Facebook. I'm just always watching, seeing how people are reacting and those kinds of things because that helps me as a writer. But anyway, sometimes somebody will post a meme and somebody else will post a meme, and I'm like, wait a minute, they are on completely polar opposite sides of this whole thing we're dealing with, but they just posted the same thing to prove their point, right? And
Yeah.
the point actually is that neither one of them feels safe. And all of the fear mongering is making it worse, whether it's about this side or about this side. It is disrupting their ability to stay calm in their own bodies. And then they go to the negative, and then and so, but it's all about feeling safe in our own body. But if we respond to everything with negative self-talk, then we don't feel safe in our own head because we're being so, I mean, okay, so you're having a
That's a
hard,
really scary thought, feeling safe in your own head, or then you don't feel safe.
right, like you're having a really, really bad day, and you just need somebody to just be like, wow, that's tough. That is a really tough day.
Mhm.
And the only person around is yourself, and you're going, why can't you da 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 da, right? You so you're the person you need. You
In
you
that
you
moment.
you are the one you need in that moment. And negative self-talk does not causes you to be unsafe with yourself.
Hmm. And that's an equally big deal. And I think I will save that for our next conversation. But the story you tell yourself about yourself
Right.
is an extension of what we're talking about, because you can have the facts in front of you, and facts are things that you see, things that you hear, but then we always take what we hear and what we see and we make a narrative about it. And
Right.
whether that is something that you are talking about, something separate from yourself, but it also bears truth in the story you're telling yourself about yourself. I bet there's a fancy big word for that too that I don't know. Janyne?
All right. I will try.
I'm gonna go
I'm
look it
getting
up.
older. I don't always come up with them. I use them when I come up with them, but if somebody asks me what the word is, I'm done.
Oh
I
wow.
have no idea. Okay, so one thing that I want to say about that, because what you just said is so important. Like the story we tell about ourselves, and where did that story begin? Okay, the story we tell about ourselves is buried inside of whatever happened to us as children. And of course, I talk about trauma, I talk about sexual abuse, I talk about all these things. You do not have to have that kind of story to be affected by something that happened to you as a child. And so I posted a Substack last Saturday about moving, and the research says that if you move between the ages of 10 and 15,
Yeah, I
if
read that one. Mm-hmm.
you moved, then you have I'm going to probably get the number right, but like 41% greater chance of being depressed as an adult. And if you move twice or more during that period, you have a 68% chance that greater chance that you will be suffer with depression as an adult. So what happens to you? And for the most part, we just take for granted. Yeah, we moved, several times. It was hard. I had to go to a new school, but we downplay that and don't realize that those things affected what we came to believe about ourselves. So sometimes when I say something negative, I can actually hear the person saying it. Okay. Whether it was a teacher, whether it was my mother, whether it was a sibling, sometimes I can actually know whose voice that is being said in. And so those things and that's where you have to be curious once again, what causes you to be anxious in situations, to feel clumsy, to feel all of those things. And for me, it's generally how many times I started a new school every year from 5th grade to 10th grade. So for 5 solid years, I went to a new school every single year. And my anxiety of going into new situations is just off the charts sometimes. And my survival skills that I use to walk into the room, own the room, and step into it and find my place there is also a phenomenal thing. But before I'm able to do that, I die of anxiety. And so these things and I'm like, why? You're going to do a good job once you get in there. Why do you have to be so negative about yourself? Oh, because of what happened to me all those years, right?
And sometimes just acknowledging that
Yes.
moment is enough to diffuse it.
Right. I mean, I just stop and I give my younger self a hug and say, you know what? I got this one. I'm not 10 years old anymore, going to a brand new school in a new state. And no, I'm not. I know how to do this. I can go in and I can do this. And so, yeah, instead of being upset with that younger part of me that gets all anxious, they just need a hug. Because that was hard. It was
Yeah.
so hard. And so, yeah, just to have compassion. So there's another
The
word like cure.
self-compassion is a big deal. This is a big deal because you are nicer to other people frequently than you are to yourself.
Yes, you are. We are. We all are.
Yes, we are. And with that, I'm going to wrap this episode up. And I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a teaser here for what we're going to talk about next, because we are talking about stories we tell ourselves. But then I'd like to continue our conversation, Janyne, with women and the stories we tell ourselves, especially in the religious environment.
Yes. Important topic.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
So, how do the pieces of your life fit together? Do they fit together well and things are humming along just fine? Or are there some pieces that are tight or absent or just not fitting the bill? This is your invitation to join me in my glass workshop for a video series where I am going to do a stained glass project while I talk to you about sustainability and building sustainability into your heart and into your life. So I am going to be doing my art, which is a form of self-care, and I'm going to invite you into that space with me, and I'm going to chat. I'm going to chat about self-care, and I'm going to show you how I create. And there's a nifty analogy. Stained glass seems to be a very good metaphor for what I want to talk about. So I'd love for you to join me. To do that, to opt in, I'll need you to email me at crabbypastor@gmail.com. That's crabbypastor@gmail.com. So you won't want to miss this. You definitely won't want to miss this. So make a plan to join me in the glass workshop. Are you wondering whether your fatigue, your lack of motivation, your lack of interest is burnout, maybe? I just wanted to let you know that I have a resource on the website, margiebryce.com. That's BRYCE, margiebryce.com. And it is a burnout questionnaire free for you to download and kind of self-assess and get a sense of where you're at. And there are questions that not only ask about what you're going through, but maybe how often you're experiencing it. And that's kind of a key to where you might be, because you have to know where you are in order to chart a course forward. And most pastors and ministry leaders who experience burnout rarely know that that's where they're at until they're well into it. And if you're unsure about that little statistic, so far everybody that I've interviewed on this podcast who has experienced burnout, when I ask that kind of question, they're like, yeah, I didn't know that's where I was at. So again, go to margiebryce.com. It's on the homepage of the website, and you can get your burnout questionnaire and kind of see where you're at. Hey friends, the Crabby Pastor podcast is sponsored by Bryce Art Glass, and you can find that on Facebook. I make stained glass, that's part of my self-care. And also by Bryce Coaching, where I coach ministry leaders and business leaders. And so the funds that I generate from coaching and from making stained glass is what is supporting this podcast. And I will have opportunities for you to be a part of sponsoring me. And as always, you can do the buy me a cup of coffee thing in the show notes. But I will have some other ways that you can be a part of getting the word out about the importance of healthy self-care for ministry leaders. Hey, thanks for listening. It is my deep desire and passion to champion issues of sustainability in ministry and for your life. So I'm here to help. I stepped back from pastoral ministry, and I feel called to help ministry leaders create and cultivate sustainability in their lives so that they can go the distance with God and whatever plans that God has for you. I would love to help. I would consider it an honor. And in all things, make sure you connect to these sustainability practices, so that you don't become the crabby pastor.